What is WWE hinting at when it comes to the eventual showdown between Jacob Fatu and Solo Sikoa? We saw a little bit of it on last week's edition of SmackDown, as it was these two getting a little bit tense backstage in the locker room, and we know that comes off the heels of Solo returning after his sabbatical when he lost the Ulafalo to Roman Reigns on the Raw Netflix debut. Solo came back, hit the spike on Cody, seemingly taking aim at getting that championship back to the family. Well, Jacob Fatu had other things in mind, did he not? As Jacob Fatu became sort of the center of the family, while Solo Sikoa walked out and left for a bit. Jacob Fatu has been the one who's continued to raise his profile in WWE, and he's the one who was having the stare down with Cody Rhodes, looking at that WWE Undisputed title until it was Solo driving into the arena. And then from there, the tension builds between these two. So what is WWE trying to tell us? What are they actually putting together between these two to really be the next chapter of the Bloodline? When you really think about it, Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, Sami Zayn, they're all off kind of doing their own thing now, right? So this is kind of the continuation of the family, of the Bloodline, because we know there are things that have to be settled between Jacob Fatu and Solo Sikoa. And we brought up many times, why is that, right? Because Solo has come up short time and time again. Every single time Solo gets an opportunity, well, he loses. And that is not going to sit well with someone who has sort of been the exact opposite. Jacob Fatu has not been the person who has been the reason why the Bloodline or the family is in the shape that it's in, right? He's not the reason for that. He's been the person that sort of helped Solo along, kept him in that high power role, but now that is not the case. And so we see the tension starting to build, right? And I love the way WWE does this because it's not going to be something where this is going to just be, hey, we're just going to all of a sudden have these two have a face-off in the back, and an hour later, it's going to be that big moment where the huge development happens, one turns on the other, right? No, we're really kind of milking this a little bit to kind of let it sit. And, well, people like us try to figure out exactly what the next move's going to be when it comes to everything. But if you really kind of go back to what was said here and how they left it, I think that's the most important, right? And I know some of you guys have already talked about it. When you look at kind of the way this whole thing played out between the two, where you have kind of the exchange where Solo's saying that, look, he needed his time off because he let the family down. But now he wants to bring everyone back together, doesn't he? Seems kind of fitting, doesn't it, Solo? To bring everyone back together to make sure they are on top again. But they have to do it as a group. They can't do it as individuals, right? And so that's what Solo's trying to achieve. And he wants Jacob Fatu to win that qualifier, to go to the Elimination Chamber. Well, as we're going to talk about, we know that didn't happen. And so Solo leaving it with sort of the opposite, right, of what we were used to. It's not Jacob Fatu telling Solo that he loves him. It's Solo telling Jacob Fatu that he loves him. And so you don't get that response from Fatu here. He walks off, and that kind of leaves things a little bit, mysterious between the two. We know they're not on the same page. Well, we fast forward to that chamber qualifier, right? And we know what happens. Solo comes out to get involved, and what does that lead to? Well, Cody Rhodes comes out to get involved as well. Leads to a little bit more distractions. We know eventually Jacob Fatu's knocked into Solo. That takes Jacob Fatu out of the mix. Damian Priest is the one who leads himself into the Elimination Chamber. And now, what is going to be the consequences, right? How does this all play out from here? Well, I think it's pretty simple when you look at it, right? The fact that they did put the line in there that Solo Sikoa told Jacob Fatu that he loved him, but Jacob Fatu noted for saying how much he loves Solo Sikoa. We said it in previous videos. There is going to be a day where Jacob Fatu is going to decide, you know what? I don't love Solo anymore. And, well, that's kind of where we are now, right? Because this would have been the easiest way to have Solo say, I love you, Jacob, and then he just says it, in response, right? But none of that, because they're building the tension between the two, aren't they? They're building it up higher and higher to where we know we're going to eventually have one of these guys snap on the other. We kind of thought from the beginning, well, it's going to be Jacob Fatu because he is the Samoan werewolf, right? He's kind of the unleashed beast here in this whole equation. Like, that's been the whole story they pushed on commentary, is that basically Tama Tonga, Jacob Fatu, whenever Solo is away, that's when you see a different side of them, right? You see them take things to another level, which is the whole reason from the beginning that Paul Heyman thought it was a bad idea to bring these guys in, was because he knew that they were willing to take things to a level that Roman Reigns and the Bloodline was not really built on. Like, they were not built on those ideals to take things to a level that these, as we've said, sort of hired mercenaries are willing to take it to. And so, because we know that, that scene that is going to eventually happen between these two, where you have Jacob Fatu and Solo Sikoa, probably right there in the middle of the ring, these two and these two only. Sure, Tama Tonga, the Tongans will be on the peripheral there, I'm sure. But to have that big dramatic moment, I keep going back to what we've always talked about, right? It is that trademark hug, and it is the whole I love you Solo thing. And you've got to believe that that's how this is all going to end between these two, to lead us to what I think right now has to be an obvious direction of a Jacob Fatu versus Solo Sikoa match at WrestleMania. I think that's the clear direction for these two based on how they're now building this up. I thought on SmackDown that really told us all we needed to know, that these two are paired together now. And the story of how they proceed, knowing that Solo wants everything to be like it was. Meanwhile, Jacob Fatu is embracing the new, right? He thinks he's the one that can bring that championship back to the family. And well, that's where, again, this is all going to kind of settle into when you fully realize that you're probably going to get that trademark hug between the two, and it's going to be Jacob Fatu not saying I love you, Solo, but I know everyone's like, hey, he's probably just going to say I hate you, Solo. And maybe that's how it works out, right? That's going to be, WWE builds these moments that we always talk about, those memorable sort of moments where you're going to have that. It's the same one they did with Paul Heyman when you think about it at Madison Square Garden, right? Heyman, supposed to be acknowledging Solo Sikoa, and they build that dramatic tension between the two during that segment where it's just kind of sitting right there in the air, and you're waiting. Is Paul Heyman going to actually say that he acknowledges Solo Sikoa? It didn't happen. They put him through the table. That's one of the big moments that we've seen in this story over the past year. It's going to be the same situation, you would think, here with these two, right? Jacob Fatu has no reason to acknowledge Solo Sikoa anymore because he doesn't have the Ulafala. So when they have this big moment where, again, maybe Solo says it for a second time, a third time, I love you, Jacob, and you get that hug, you realize Jacob's not going to say it, and he's probably going to say the opposite. That's where you have that big sort of turn, and you've got to think that's kind of one of the potential options, or maybe one of the most likely options for how this thing plays out to lead us into that match between the two. Now, there does become a bit of a problem, and I don't know that it's a bad problem, but when you see the way that the crowd was responding to Jacob Fatu on last week's edition of SmackDown, we've seen this also be something that over the weeks, we know that the crowd has gotten more and more into this guy as he's had this opportunity to talk more, right? We're getting to know the Samoan werewolf Jacob Fatu more. We're liking what we're hearing, what we're seeing from him. And from the beginning, we said that WWE put him in a position where he was going to be very protected. They were going to keep him kind of over as much as they could to get him to that eventual next level of being a top-tier star, perhaps a WWE Undisputed Champion level type guy on this roster. And now, when you look at the way they've kind of played this out, the crowd wants to cheer for Jacob Fatu. And so, I think what we've seen kind of in this era with Triple H is that I don't know that you're necessarily going to have maybe that clearly defined, hey, this guy's the babyface, this guy's the heel. If you do, I think a lot more people are going to cheer Jacob Fatu than they are Solo Sikoa, and we kind of saw that last week on SmackDown, right? So what are they going to do to maybe try to play with that dynamic a little bit? Are they just going to say, hey, let the crowd cheer who they want to cheer for? And again, I think 85 probably plus % of those people are going to cheer for Jacob Fatu just because he is such a phenomenon, right? Whether it comes to the in-ring stuff, whether it comes to the promos, like he is sort of just one of a kind. So are they going to just go that route and say, we're going to let the crowd decide who they cheer for? Because the obvious babyface in this story, the person who you would think is going to be the one that gets cheered, right? Based on the story itself, is Solo. Because, Solo, the young guy, tries to rise to the throne. He gets a little power hungry. Come on, everyone's been there, right? But eventually he meets his downfall when it comes to, the old guard taking, the Ulafala back and Roman Reigns. And Solo realizes, okay, maybe I got a little too excited here. And I went a little too over the top. And now I kind of come back down to earth. And as Solo said, he let the family down. He wants to try to make up for it. All right, there's nothing wrong with that. We can see sort of the good in Solo. And we always said Solo was always acknowledging sort of the tradition of the Ulafala, saying that whoever had it, they were the tribal chief. So he wasn't really pushing back against that idea. So in the whole story, Solo is the person we probably should be cheering, if you're just looking at it from an actual storytelling standpoint. But because Jacob Fatu is, well, Jacob Fatu, it's going to make it hard, I think, for everyone to go out and maybe see Solo as this sympathetic figure, right? Because we've seen all the bad things that Solo has done. And you really look at all the things that Jacob Fatu's done, sure, they've been bad too, but they've been impressive. They've been impressive. And I think that maybe is the difference, is that people have bought in to the idea that Jacob Fatu is the person they want to cheer for, maybe in this scenario. And again, we had all the Jacob chants on SmackDown last week, and you've got to wonder, how does that play with maybe what WWE wants to actually achieve here, and can they actually make it to where people are going to cheer Solo Sikoa over Jacob Fatu? That may be one of the challenges they have in front of them as they start to build up this feud between the two. And again, I think it's going to be a very exciting, back and forth to try to see how they get there. Because again, this has been the big part of the story that we knew was going to sort of, play out eventually. It was just a matter of how they're going to do it. And now we wait and see. Coming off the heels, a dramatic exchange between the two. Now, what's next with Jacob Fatu and Solo Sikoa? Let me know what you guys think. How do you see this thing playing out? Who's going to be the heel? Who's going to be the babyface? Do you think it's just inevitable that Jacob Fatu has to be the person that somehow they put in the role, or does it matter? Is this just telling the story and letting the fans decide how they want to react to it? You guys let me know what you think in the comments. How does it play out between Jacob Fatu and Solo Sikoa? Hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button. Always appreciate you watching. And let me know your thoughts on what's next with the Bloodline drama and Jacob Fatu and Solo Sikoa.